Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. Listeners, we are joined by a rising star, Chessable author and trainer, who I will be speaking with momentarily. But first, did want to give a thanks to Chessable, our presenting chess education sponsor. You'll be hearing about our guest courses eventually, so you can wait for that. But also just wanted to remind you guys that if you sign up for Chessable Pro using the link in the show description, not only do you get features like Puzzle Connect and discounts on courses and stuff like that, but it helps to support Perpetual Chess. So if you're interested, take a look. Now, as for our guest this week, he is a Singapore-based player who saw rapid games up to the candidate master level once he taught himself to study tactics. He's become a very popular and well-reviewed chessable author, especially his courses around the topic of calculation. For the intermediate or so level, he created Calculation, a complete guide for tournament players. And his most recent course out this year is called An Introduction to Chess Calculation, and it's geared more towards lower-rated players. So I'm excited to discuss the courses, but also just general chess improvement and life, and to welcome to the pod, CM Azel Chua. Welcome, Azel.
Thank you for having me, Ben. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we could make this work. So we're recording here. It's 12-hour time difference between New Jersey and Singapore. So late at night for me and a little early for you. I don't know. You're young. So is 10:30 a.m. early for you, Azel?
No, it's quite late in the morning for me. It's all good.
Okay. I was telling him before we were recording, listeners, that he's only 21 and already has a few chessable hits on his hands, and I've been digging into his courses, and they're very professionally and thoroughly presented. So I was telling him that he's got his stuff together a lot more than I did, and 10:30 a.m. not being late for him as it was for me when I was 21 is further proof of that. But anyway, enough discourse about when we wake up. Let's get into chess, Azel. So I wanted to dig into your background. It talks in your page, and I'll be referencing an interview that you did with Jesse and Matt from Chessgoals a few times that I also found interesting. So you were not like a star player, but then at some point it sounds like you got serious and you made a rapid rise. And you even mentioned in your interview with them that you were studying chess during classroom time. So I'd love to hear about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll first get into the reason I wanted to be super serious about chess. And that was because of what I wanted to do when I grew up. When I was looking at various jobs you can have, studying academics, going to university, it all didn't seem very appealing to me. But if you said anything remotely chess related, it sounded fun. I could be a chess coach sitting outside tournaments and chatting with the parents, or a chess streamer, or an author, or even an arbiter. Even a chess arbiter sounded like fun to me. So I knew that if I wanted to achieve that, I had to get very good at chess. And that's when I dedicated most of my time just studying and playing, mostly playing. And to squeeze in even more hours, I would do my study and play during class time. I would sneak in, Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, look at the position a bit. Or when I got a little bit better, when I was past 1800, I could memorize a few endgame puzzles, endgame studies, and I'll just solve it blindfolded mid-class. So that was the level of obsession I had for chess. Now I'm very happy to see it play out.
That's funny. Now, it's been a long time since I've been in school, but back in the day, I did a little bit of chess during classroom time, but also, hit other distractions during classes that I found less than interesting. So my question for you, Azel, is Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, unless you're reading that one digitally, that's a tough book to hide. That's a big book. So how did that work?
Yeah, you know what? I think the teachers just knew that they couldn't stop me after some point. Because what could they do? They could kick me out of class with the Endgame manual, and I wouldn't mind too much. So it was all good. And usually I don't read during the classes that I need to pay attention to. So for Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, I'll read it when everyone else is reading the newspaper. There are periods where you get to have some reading material, and I'll use a chess encyclopedia or something during that time.
Okay, and Dvoretsky's Endgame manual in particular has become something of a lightning rod, a bit controversial on the pod. No one disputes that it's a great book, but it just seems like a lot of developing players, and I wrote about this in my own book a little bit, get recommended it maybe before they're ready for it. What is your take on A, how good a book it is, and B, like, at what level one might be well advised to spend a lot of time studying it, whether they're in class or not.
Right. So Dvoretsky's Endgame manual is not necessary unless you're a chess master. I'm going to put it that way. And the reason is that it contains endgames that are necessary at the beginner level, like the Philidor or the Lucina. But what will be better suited if you're a beginner is a book that's more curated to help you identify those commonly occurring and simple endgames. Now, what I use the endgame manual for is to improve my interest and passion for chess, because there are lots of interesting endgames. There are many new features like Zugzwangs that you only see in the endgame. And the other thing is, I used it as a way to improve my visualization, because I have to read the book without playing out the chess pieces. So those were the two reasons I read Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, for my passion and for visualization.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And obviously, you did make it up to 2200 FIDE, which is certainly an appropriate level for a book like that. And let me ask you, Azel, so as you've described, you're a very sort of purposeful guy from what I can gather in terms of both how you approach your Chessable courses and sort of career design, even at a young age. How did you sort of wrap your head around how to get better at chess once you sort of determined that it was a necessity that you get significantly stronger?
It was a lot of guesswork for me. And it was also me disagreeing with what I heard from a lot of chess coaches and what I read online, because it seemed like I couldn't consistently apply it. For example, things like using checks, captures, and threats, advice like when you see a good move, look for better. And try as I might to follow those pieces of advice, I find myself stuck against the wall, because I don't feel sufficiently motivated to do that throughout the game, and I can't sustain these type of techniques across a 4-hour game for the rest of my life. So I had to find something that felt more effortless, and I understood, even as a chess amateur, that grandmasters are not using that much energy when they play chess. So whatever training I do, the purpose is to be able to play good moves without the need to use that much energy.
Okay, well, I got to follow up on the checks, captures, and threats thing. So for listeners, for context, this is one of Azel's hot takes. He talked about it in his interview with Jesse and Matt. He also mentions it in A Complete Guide to Calculation, and makes a very compelling argument, I must say, although it took me aback a little bit. But first, I think listeners would be well served to hear you expound on why you think that's not the best advice for how to approach solving tactics.
All right, yeah. In fact, this will actually go into all my other calculation techniques. So I'll explain a bit on how my calculation technique works and how it ties into why I don't believe checks, captures, and threats is a good technique. So with anything related to chess improvement, I believe you have to work on intuition instead of demanding conscious and consistent effort from you throughout the game. As I've explained, grandmasters probably don't use that much effort compared to an amateur chess player. They're just more efficient. And I'm going to use an analogy to help you out here. So, Ben, let's say you know 100 people in your neighborhood or in your city. As you walk around and bump into them, how difficult is it for you to identify them? It's probably effortless, yeah? And you don't even need to constantly look out for them. So the way that you were able to achieve that is because you were already familiar with those 100 people. And so as you bump into them, it's effortless that you are able to identify them. And there's no conscious process required for this. There's nothing like every 5 minutes when you're in public, you have to spin one round and look at everybody around you, see if one of them is your friend, or you should carry a stool wherever you go. Every 100 steps you take, stand on top of the stool, look over the crowd. That none of these conscious actions are required or even practical for you to identify things and make something part of your intuition. So the underlying principle of my technique is that familiarity with tactical targets and tactical clues actually works. Getting comfortable, identifying open lines towards the enemy king, identifying unprotected pieces, do it with ease, and the moves will come naturally. Whereas if you demand constant a constant search and constant effort to identify checks, captures, and threats, or to find a better move when you see a good one, it just doesn't work for most people. So that is my issue with checks, captures, and threats, is that one of which is that you give up on it too easily. And it's not because humans are lazy, it's because that's just how the brain works.
Yeah, it's interesting. In reading what you said about it, it got me thinking because, I'm in my 40s and I have to tell you this whole checks, captures, and threats thing, if anyone listening, thinks the etymology goes back further, please let me know. But, I played chess starting in like the late 1980s. God, I'm old, and played through the 90s. And I didn't really, and then became a chess teacher eventually. And I didn't really hear them get mentioned until really the aughts, the 2000s for sure. And even more so in the past 15 years. I was trying to think about where the concept might have first been mentioned. And obviously, there's this famous book, Forcing Chess Moves, Charles Hertan, where he describes checks, captures, and threats. So I'm not sure if it predated that or not. But one thing I'll tell you, Azel, is it used to be even worse. So I guess part of the reason I was initially surprised to hear you, sort of criticize this sacred cow of checks, captures, and threats was that I feel like people used to just be kind of casting around on their own without any sort of heuristic when they tried to solve tactics. And so once as a teacher, and that's the age that I come from, I just, studied Fisher and Morphy's games and played a lot and, got decent at tactics. I didn't have any system at all. So once checks, captures, and threats was presented as a system, I think especially for educators, it resonated. Now, your burger technique, which we'll get into, may be an improvement on it. But one thing that struck me about it was that I felt like, well, before we go on, you should probably describe the burger technique and then I'll have a follow-up.
Right. So the burger technique, as I mentioned, the effort you put into chess should be in all the groundwork. And by the time you're playing games, it should feel intuitive and effortless. So the burger technique is a 3-step process that requires you to identify the context of the position, like counting material and identifying tactical targets, open lines towards king, unprotected pieces, forkable pieces, just to name a few. And once you're so familiar identifying these targets, which is like identifying the 100 people in your neighborhood, it becomes effortless to spot them mid-game. If I were to point out to you mid-game that there is an exposed king here and an unprotected bishop there, you can't help but notice that there's a queen fork of the king and the bishop. So that is what the burger technique aims to do. It feels effortful in practice, but once it comes to the game, it will feel effortless, unlike the need to constantly look for checks, captures, and threats throughout the game.
Okay, yeah, and obviously you explained it very well, as you do in your course. And Azel, you also, with the burger technique, you mentioned assessing material first, which I really appreciated because I think that's the groundwork for what you're looking for, as you discuss in your course, where if you're down a queen, you've got to take more risk. I mean, you look for checkmates, just as a more extreme example. But the burger technique, the one thing that I was less sure about, because I agree with what you're saying about checks, captures, and threats, you'd find yourself looking at a lot of irrelevant moves. You mentioned that you can miss quiet moves. But one thing and I really liked your course, especially what stood out to me was how well chosen the puzzles were. But with the burger technique, as you say in the course, the most challenging part is sort of developing the intuition. So my question was like, what if people forget one of the things that they should be looking for in the big part, the middle part of the burger technique? Like there's so many sort of tactical motifs and pieces on the same line and unguarded pieces. So do you still think one should use a sort of checklist type setup for that? Or do you think just work on internalizing it more and more?
Yeah, the checklist is a placeholder, and the idea is to internalize it more and more. And what I want to assure everybody, what I want to assure you, is that we are the human mind is very well designed to internalize all of that in a very wide range of information. And the example I can give you would be checkmating patterns. You don't ever have to consciously go through a checklist. Is there back rank checkmate? Is there back rank checkmate on move 23? Is there back rank on move 24? It's somewhere deep in your mind, And the moment it presents itself, you identify it like you identify the face of your friend or your family, and then you execute the checkmate straight away. And all I'm helping you do is, instead of just identifying back rank checkmates, you expand your search and familiarity to every other tactical target. And that is also another benefit of the technique, is that it's scalable. So somebody could take my technique, you could take my technique and grow it to use in all different types of chess situations, not just for tactics. You can have strategical targets, you can have endgame targets and clues, and you can also have new types of tactical targets that maybe require some third order thinking. Like, this is a critical square because it could fork two squares that could fork four pieces, something like that. And there's no way to stop that multi-prong fork.
Yeah, and the steps method, which I think has some similarity, like in terms of what they advise, they call it orientation. Basically, you're starting with a very big picture view, and then you can slowly zoom down. Um, I, so one question I had for sure about this, because I do, like, again, it's like such a radical concept to me that I kind of really had to wrap my head around it and think about the relative pros and cons of each, which I think of both checks, captures, and threats and the burger technique. And I think that there are pros and cons of each. But one question I had was where you came up with the name, because it makes a big difference.
Where I came up with the name, I've always thought of this as kind of like a burger that I was gradually growing as I was improving the technique. Because, the top bun and the bottom bun, which is the first and last step of identifying material and finding out the picking candidate moves, was always the same. But what really improved with the technique in my use through the years is that the core of the burger got thicker with more and more ingredients. So unprotected pieces was one of the first things I came up with. That's like the lettuce, and then I had critical lines and squares that became the tomatoes, and so on. So that's why I envision it as a burger. Now, on your point with the pros and cons of the burger technique against checks, captures, and threats, I think it's quite easily answered by reflecting on how you think when you approach chess positions. So Ben, when you identify a Greek gift in the middle of a game, when you identify a bishop takes h7 check, what was it that helped you identify that Greek gift? Was it because you were constantly looking for checks throughout the game, and then on move 17, after 16 failures of identifying checks, that move 17 was the one that yielded fruit? Or was it because you saw some feature of the Greek gift, such as the unprotected h7 square, such as the absence of a knight on f6?
Yeah, it's pattern recognition, of course.
It's pattern recognition is the second one, and not because you were constantly searching for checks, captures, and threats.
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. It's just that I found it to be helpful primarily as like a blunder check. Like, and I'm perhaps not the best case study. Like, your primary student is probably a bit lower rated and maybe didn't learn chess as a kid, because I have the sort of, even though I'm not like a grandmaster or anything, I do have the sort of deeply internalized thinking, for better or for worse. But I think for the people that you're trying to help the most, I think it can be a very good technique, but I just worry about like blunders, for example. Like for me, checks, captures, and threats are very effective as a blunder check, if nothing else.
Well, yeah, the blunder check, the burger technique also helps you on the blunder check. Because let's say you are worried about losing material. What's the way that you could possibly lose material if one of your pieces ends up with more attackers than defenders? And so, what are the pieces that are at risk of becoming hanged are those pieces with the same number of attackers and defenders. So if I have no unprotected pieces, if all my pieces are overprotected, that is the blunder check already done. I know none of my pieces can be attacked sufficiently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just worry about people overlooking stuff. But anyway, we should come back to this course, but and general calculation method. But once we got into it, we kind of lost the thread of how you yourself got good. Now, I know you played fairly frequently in Singapore. Like, what was your mix of competing as compared to studying when you were training and playing actively?
I would only compete during the school holidays. So there's a big tournament in Singapore in June, and then there are maybe a couple more in December. So that was my main chess calendar for the year. And so every time I go for a tournament, I have to steal as much rating as I can in that short period.
It's funny.
And,
Yeah, I heard you mention steal rating when you were talking to Jesse and Matt. I don't look at it as stealing. You're earning it. You know?
well, it feels like stealing to me, right? Partly because of the rating economy that is experienced in Singapore, and that gives, in my view, a sense of scarcity of rating in a Singapore economy. So we need rich people in Singapore flying overseas, flying to Europe and Australia, stealing the rating there, and then coming back to distribute, and then the economy will improve.
I think we feel that way in the United States too.
Well, post-COVID, everything is like that. Now we all have the injection, so the rating will flow forward soon enough.
Yeah, it helps. And you had some interesting points in the interview about rating as well. And I only know a little bit about the chess culture in Singapore. I mean, I know it's a relatively small country. I interviewed Kevin Go Wei Meng, who had the amazing story of making Grandmaster. And I know that like chess historian Olympia or Khan's there. And Junior Tay, I really enjoyed Ivanchuk Move by Move. So that suggests to me that there's a strong chess culture in Singapore. But I know Kevin, for example, who's now like working with the Singapore national team, he wants the country to be even stronger. Like, what's your perspective on how chess culture compares in Singapore to Western countries?
The chess culture is quite strong considering it's Singapore. And the reason I say that is that there's so much emphasis put on academics. And so most of the parents only send their kids to play chess because it counts as an extracurricular activity that could get you into top schools. And so that happens mostly at 12 years old, when you're getting into secondary school when you turn 13. And so what you find is that for a lot of Singaporeans, they drop out at 12 years old because the parents wanted them to just get to school and then be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing that gets in the way is national service. All the Singaporean men need to serve in the army for 2 years. And you're just getting bossed around, and your mental capacity drops quite a bit during that period.
What ages is that?
It's once you turn 18, but if you have some kind of education before that, you could start at 19 or 20.
Okay. So are you done with that?
Yeah, I'm done with that. So those are the two things getting in the ways of rising juniors in Singapore.
Okay. So and what about you? Did you start before you were 12 or?
No, I started at 12, and it wasn't to get into a good school or anything. I just liked chess.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How did you discover it?
My brother actually introduced it to me, and he's not even that good at chess. He might be 700 on chess.com if he played. That's my guess. Now, he was just in the news and was like, hey, it's Magnus Carlsen's birthday. And then I went to look it up, and I got deep in the weeds and eventually started playing chess. I have no idea, how I stumbled into it, but I just did. So that's how I got into chess.
So did you have like cohorts? Did you have like a school program or friends who were into it?
Yeah. The school I went to, Rulang Primary, was very supportive of chess, and they would teach everybody chess when they turn 9, and they have these regular chess tournaments or annual chess tournaments and extra activities that you can participate in. So that really helped with the chess culture a lot. So during recess, there's a chess corner. They even invested a couple $1,000s into giant chess pieces.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. The only thing I wish that we could have is a chess clock for the giant chess, and we can play bullet and make it a lot more of an exercise.
Yeah, I mean, that's fun generally, but kids in particular would love that. So So you got into it at 12, and then again, eventually you've developed your own sort of framework that's obviously been quite effective. But like, how did you come to that? Like, were you before you got to Dvoretsky's Endgame manual? Were you reading books? Were you watching YouTube videos? Like, what was your approach?
My approach was that At the start, there was a lot of guesswork. I would watch YouTube, and the good side about YouTube is mostly in developing passion for the game. Because when you get to see other perspectives, that's what's most helpful. But what I believe is the biggest reason I improved is, first of all, spending most of my time playing and analyzing games. Because I saw loads of chess players in Singapore. They were always studying. They were always reading books, and they'll talk about how many books they have completed. And yet they don't have as much success when it comes to competitions. And I inferred that it's because when you're in a chess competition, you're training to play chess, not see who is more disciplined at studying. So I came to realize quite quickly that playing and analyzing games was most important. And the second thing was working on my intuition. Because as I've mentioned, intuition is everything when it comes to chess. And so that was my main focus. And the way that I improved my intuition was also by paying attention to my thoughts as I was solving puzzles that I already knew how to solve. And the Greek gift is one example. Did I solve the Greek gift because I knew about it? I knew the pattern, or was it because I was looking for checks? And then that's how I realized what is working and what's not working. And you can extrapolate that into master level.
Yeah. I'm certainly an advocate of building up your pattern recognition skills up to a certain level. But then there becomes a point where every position is different, which is kind of what your course is about. Obviously, you're teaching calculation sort of from the ground up. So what other recommendations do you have for developing players looking to build their intuition?
To build your intuition, I have a couple of techniques. I'm sure you've heard of them, Ben, as I spoke about it in the No Pun Intended podcast. And one of the key ones is aiming to explain everything in 3 seconds. Whenever you miss a tactical combination, you get something wrong, you have to explain it. You have to explain a compelling case to look into it within 3 seconds. For example, I'll use the Greek gift because most people know it. Let's say you didn't find the Greek gift and you have to explain why is bishop takes h7 possibly a good move. And you don't have to see through all the lines. You just have to give a slightly compelling explanation on why you ought to look at that move in the first place. And you can say, oh, h7 is unprotected and I can get knight and queen into the game very quickly. That is potentially dangerous. Again, this does not solve the whole problem, but it gives you sufficient motivation to look into it. And so in a real game, if you have that same motivation to start looking at bishop takes h7, you get the ball rolling and eventually you'll find the moves. So that's on improving intuition. Now, on general improvement, I always emphasize this, that the bulk of your time should be spent playing and analyzing games. And on game analysis, the idea is not to cover everything in such tremendous detail. Instead, what I recommend doing is pick off the lowest hanging fruits that you have. And the lowest hanging fruits have two characteristics. First, they are mistakes that are easy to correct. Let's say you played a game and you made two mistakes. One of them you missed a checkmate in 1, and the other you missed a checkmate in 7. I would prioritize the mate in 1 because the mate in 1 is easier to correct. The second characteristic of a low-hanging fruit is that it has the heaviest influence on the result of the game. For example, if you missed an opportunity to deliver checkmate and you also missed an opportunity to control the center, I would prioritize the checkmate, because if you checkmate, the game ends immediately. Whereas if you got the center control, there's still a tough battle ahead of you. And it all sounds like common sense, but it's definitely not common practice from what I've witnessed. Because notice that in this breakdown of how to improve really fast at chess, I didn't make any mention of specific activities on what to do outside of playing and analyzing. Nothing about specific openings, nothing about reading certain books. And that's because there's a big gap between reading books and getting good at chess. So I would only do it if that is your specific mistake. And this might be a new perspective for you listening. So I'll list some possible problems you may have, some examples, and how I would try to help you. If, say, you lose a lot of games because you're in time trouble, then my advice is to play faster time controls with the same amount of increment. So if you want to get good at 15 plus 10 chess, the appropriate time controller train will be 1 plus 10, and it simulates the exact type of time trouble you'll face. And this addresses the problem in the most direct way. Or if you miss simple tactics frequently, then do loads of puzzle rush. There's a high volume of easy puzzles. Conversely, if your problem is with deep calculation, then do the untimed puzzles. Get used to sitting on 5 minutes for on a complex position. And so the main thing is play and analyze games, pick off the lowest hanging fruits, and only use studying or other activities as a means to fix the weaknesses that you have already identified.
Yeah, I can't argue with it. It's great advice. But I am curious hearing you mention openings, because obviously that is sort of a lightning rod topic as well, with a lot of people being sort of gravitationally pulled toward them, while a lot of trainers might advise against studying them. I've noticed your courses, for the most part, are not opening focused. Like, what was your approach to openings as you climbed the ladder, Azel?
I hardly worked on my openings at all.
I had a feeling that's what you were going to say. Oh, okay. I lost the internet for a second. Can you repeat the answer just in case?
Yeah. I hardly focused on my openings at all. And the reason is that openings never seem to be the main cause of me losing games. Like, sure, there are some games where I would just get crushed in the first 10 moves because I didn't know what I was doing. But those were quite rare. And what compensated for me a lot more is that I would solve tactics mid-game a lot better than my opponents. And so it just so happened that for most of the time, tactics was the reason I was losing games and not openings. And as a result, I became, for my rating, a lot more overpowered at tactics and very underdeveloped in openings.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not true for everyone. Again, there will be people who are doing what Azel says and do a comprehensive review of their games, and they're just not getting out of the opening. But what I've observed from amateur players is a lot of them might have an opening not go the way they want, or might not feel familiar with the opening. And that sort of sets them on their back foot, and they feel uncomfortable with how the game progresses, and they end up losing. And they might then attribute the loss to the opening. Now, the opening contributed to it, but as you were saying, if you actually try to look at the biggest factor, it was some tactic or something, or fatigue or playing impulsively or something that might have taken you from the opening didn't go the way you wanted and you were, say, -1 or whatever, but that might have been holdable. But then you made a move that got you to -4, something like that.
It's interesting that you bring this up, Ben. And the reason I want to point this out here is that the lowest hanging fruit, as I've talked about in analysis, doesn't have to be what caused the biggest drop in the evaluation. It could be what made life tough for you already. So if you played the opening poorly, got into -1 position, and then because the position was so difficult, you couldn't find the move that maintained it and you dropped to -4, you could say that the lowest hanging fruit is the opening because that was the easiest point to fix the game. Whereas by the time you were in trouble, that's too tough to expect anything from you. So
that's
yes,
it
could be possible. It could be possible in this regard that openings are your weakest point. And while I'm here, I want to give some credit to Simon Williams for influencing most of my opening repertoire. And it's not because it was particularly aggressive or his crazy style. The reason I like Simon Williams' openings is that I didn't have to study that much. Everything was all, it's a one-size-fits-all kind of opening, like the London system, use it against everything. And you can play the Dutch against d4, c4, and knight f3. And you can kind of transpose it to the French as well. So if your opponent plays d4, you can go e6. You're ready for the classical Dutch and you're ready for the French. And so that was the opening repertoire that I liked very much.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It makes sense, saves a ton of energy. And what about with white? What did you settle on?
London system.
Oh, yeah, you said that. Sorry. Yeah. And Simon practices what he preaches. I mean, he's had a lot of good results with those openings. Couple other things, just out of curiosity, since we're recording this right after the candidates ended, have you gotten into pro chess, or are you more focused on improving your game and your students' games?
No, I don't follow the results very much. I mean, I don't follow the games much. I do follow the results, and I like to see who wins and all that. But that's about it. I don't look into it in any tremendous detail.
And what about like chess history and like the former world champions? I mean, it sounds like you've got I don't know, a sort of an optimization type mindset towards how you've approached chess. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, for me, because my passion for chess was so great that I can look to optimize it, and passion or general interest was a low priority. And now you can see one of the flaws in that, and that is I am completely ignorant of chess history and current chess affairs like the candidates or if there's some scandal going on and so on.
There's always a scandal. um, all right. Well, this has been really interesting. I feel like we should give them a few more nuggets, give listeners a few more nuggets from your courses. Again, I strongly recommend them. Even though, again, I'm not sure I fully agree on getting rid of checks, captures, and threats. But one thing that struck me about the course was the material is so good. The puzzles you actually use are so good that alone makes it worth it. So I was curious, as someone who's trying to finish up a Chessable course, like where you came up with the positions. Did you imagine them or just comb through databases?
Right. I'll give you my process. I've not given this away before on how I produce so many Chessable courses in a short period of time. So what I do is I have all the ideas laid out already. I've got the calculation course, I've got the workbook, and the openings and the attacks and so on. And so what I do is I now have multiple buckets I need to fill. So one bucket will be look for positions that involve critical squares, or look for one position that involves opening the position when you have a superior lead in development. And I keep all these buckets, there are maybe 10 to 30 of them in the back of my mind. And I'll just comb through everything, databases, or where I think I'm most likely to find it. And when I see one position that fits in the bucket, I'll take a screenshot and I'll drop it in there. So essentially, by combing through 5,000 games or something, I'm able to have all the games that I need, all the positions I need, and just drop it into the different Chessable courses. So in doing so, I'm building 4 courses at once.
That's brilliant. That's what I'm doing, except only for one course. So that's why you're way more productive.
Right, but that's the thing about doing it for one course, right? Because you have to ultimately maybe only 1% of the positions you look at turn out to be helpful for in creating your material. So if you have other ideas at the back of your mind, you may as well put some tags for that. And this way, 10% of the positions you encounter will prove useful.
Good stuff. And let's give one more sort of preview. I mean, and this is a concept that's been written about elsewhere, most notably to me, this classic hard book, Imagination in Chess. But you also have a really good chapter on the idea of reciprocal thinking in your complete calculation course. To the extent possible, which I think you could do it, to the extent possible on a no chess diagram podcast, how would you explain reciprocal thinking?
How would I explain reciprocal thinking without a chess position? When you see a move that you like, but it doesn't work, don't jump to another random move. Instead, identify the cause of failure for that first move and only look for subsequent candidate moves that rectify the problem. It's as best I can put it. Yeah.
And your examples are so good for that.
Thank you.
They're really good. And that's one. So I'm just curious, like, because, from my perspective, you're so young and you come sort of fully formed, which is really impressive. But something like reciprocal thinking, I think, more so than the burger technique, which is like purely your own, that's been written about before. So I'm curious, like, would you remember where you came across it?
I came across it in a John Bartholomew video on reciprocal thinking. And then he referenced Patak Prindishvili's book.
Okay.
So that's as far back as I could trace, and I believe that's the source.
Yeah, that goes back to Imagination in Chess. Yeah, and shout out to John, obviously one of the great chess YouTubers. So you mentioned in the podcast with Matt and Jesse that your own game, you think it's still on the back burner? You're not planning on training in the near future?
No, not really. Not really. It's a lot more. It's a lot more enjoyable to do the chess as a career that is teaching, making courses, making videos. So that's what I enjoy most, and I'll stick to that.
So you think you're done?
Yeah, well, unless they say one day FIDE says the candidate master title is now invalid and you have to be FIDE master, then maybe I'll figure something out.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I always give, and actually this is one thing I didn't write in my book that I wish I had said more explicitly. People your age who are able, like, because, a lot of, again, I'm in my 40s and a lot of people grumble about how much harder it gets to improve at chess. So I generally do advise people in their early 20s, if they have enough of their other life sorted out where they don't feel like they're neglecting their other life to pursue chess, then it is a good time in life to still make significant progress in your chess. But on the other hand, as we've discussed, I feel like you've already got unusual perspective for like what you love about chess and what you want to accomplish with it. So maybe you don't need the advice to push the pedal to the metal a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I mean, I thought about this very seriously, Ben. And what I concluded is that all along, my goal was to make a career out of chess. And back when I was an amateur, if you want to make a career, you probably have to be decent at it. So that's when studying chess made sense. And when I got my candidate master title, I considered if I should be pursuing further to FMIMGM, or if I ought to be pursuing the career side of things further. And it's the same principle I preach with chess improvement. Take the most direct route. The most direct route to make a career out of chess is to work on the career rather than get good at it. So, or get much better at it. So
yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, candidate master is obviously, quite a respectable level, and higher than most people reach. So this has been great, Azel. Again, I really recommend the course. By the way, so we should probably specify rating ranges. I could certainly guess myself, but what rating ranges would you say? I mean, obviously, and I full disclosure, I only looked in detail at your 2 calculation courses, but for what levels would you recommend your courses? Like,
I'll use chess.com Rapid as the metric here. For the introduction to chess calculation, I would say between 600 and 1200. And for the main course, I'll put it at 1200 to 2000.
Okay. Yeah, that's about where I would have gone. I might bump the second one. I might start at 1400 or so. The puzzles, I mean, the ideas are very, very insightful, but the puzzles themselves, I think are get to be reasonably challenging. But yeah, this has been great. Do you have any parting final advice that you feel that listeners should know regarding like how to optimize their chess time or anything else?
How to optimize chess time? Just enjoy the game, really. That's the main thing. Yeah. If you're not enjoying it, there's quite literally no purpose to playing chess.
Well said. And do you still play much? Like, do you play much Blitz online?
Not a lot. I play 30-second or 45-second bullet with a Lee chess bot quite a bit, but that's about it.
Wow. Hey, you're purist. You're like a chess academic of sorts. All right. Well, Azel, congrats on all your success. It's really impressive. And just remind listeners, I mean, obviously Chessable is a sponsor of the pod, but just a reminder that there's a refund with their courses. So the true of Azel's courses and anyone else's, if you check it out and don't like it, you can send it back within, do you know how, is it 2 weeks? I should know this.
30 days.
30 days. Thank you.
But yeah, and wait, to add to that, if you just want to have my course for free, you have my blessing to buy it and then return it after 20-something days.
Wow. Okay. They're not. I hope the Chessable people turned off the pod by now. Okay. All right, Azel, great to chat again. Congrats. And I'm going to continue. Maybe we'll continue this debate some other time because I still need to let marinate the idea of letting go of checks, captures, and threats. But again, doesn't diminish the value of your contributions to chess thinking. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me.